Recording in progress. So I don't want her to miss anything, and if in case she's um having a having an issue, because having been in hotel rooms with unstable internet, it's very frustrating. So Anne, can you hear us now? I don't see. Let's see. Let's see. That's strange. So let's see if you ask to unmute. So okay, so I see that you've unmuted your microphone, Anne. Can you say something to us? Here, let me. I wish I knew sign language.
Um,
I'm kind of hearing you. I think probably, let's see, we're recording. I see that your microphone is on. The mic is on. Now, is this? I'm
Can
kind
you
of
hear me?
a little bit. You're cutting in and out. Cutting. You're cutting in and out.
Yeah. Um,
You know, technology is great, and then
I'm at the hotel, so I'll watch the recording.
okay,
Sorry.
okay, not to worry. So, hello everybody. Any questions, comments, thoughts from last time?
Yes,
Like
Kenneth,
to ask.
this is Paula. Good
Yeah,
evening.
Paula. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm still confused about class. Are we going to go through these lessons
Yes.
and then we're going to do another class after a few weeks or something?
Okay, so what we're doing, see, we're not going to be completely constructing the whole jacket in this installment.
Okay.
You know, we're going to get to a certain point in this installment, then we're going to stop, and I'm going to actually poll everyone you know, a little further down to figure out when we should start the next like session number 2, because I don't want to kind of run into Christmas time at that, because everyone has other things to do. And so it's 3 different sections that at the end of this 3-series class, you're going to have a completed jacket.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, because one of the things I was looking when I was doing this class, I was making my jacket here, I realized I had 19 videos. And, you know, if you just like throw 19 videos at I know my brain would freeze and I'd never get it done. And so Linda Maynard had this suggestion, and she does this for her tailoring classes, is that, you know, you have this, you get from here to here in the first installment, and then you give them some time to get their homework done, because we have lives, we have other things we're doing. And so then we start the second and we do this to this, and then you have another space of time when you can get that homework done, so that the final installment, we get to, we're going to completely finish this jacket. So that is how it's been set up.
Thank you.
Okay. So
Good.
questions, comments? Yeah, Judy.
I have two quick questions.
Yeah.
Should silk tweed be underlined?
How heavy is it?
It's got some texture, but I'm not sure that it's real heavy.
Okay, I would. It, you know, it might not be optimum for the pad stitching, but if that's, if you're going to put, what I would do is I would experiment with different kinds of inner lining. A silk organza is kind of the least heavy. If it's the silk twill that I've worked with, I would use something like what a Siri cotton broadcloth, or maybe cotton flannelette, because that's going to give you a little more heft. So, but yeah, it should work. But I think I would definitely interline it.
Alrighty. And then my second question is, on the Duchess satin,
Yes.
it seems the right side is a little bit rough and the wrong side is our typical smooth satin. Is it okay to use the smooth satin out?
Well, my understanding is that the smooth satin side is the front of the fabric.
Okay, then my swatch was not assembled correctly.
Yeah. And so, and see, this is one thing I learned a long time ago is, you know, because see, you'll notice sometimes that I say the face in the reverse as opposed to the right side and the wrong side, because someone said to me once, there is no right and wrong side of the fabric. You decide which is the face and which is the back. And in a Duchess satin, I most definitely would decide that the smooth side is the face, because it's going to make putting the jacket on much more smooth. Because if you've ever had a jacket, and I had a jacket some years ago it was this weird silk and it had a matte finish to it, that damn thing never stayed put. You know, it's like I'd move and it would just kind of there, and I'd have to kind of always adjust it back because it wasn't slick enough. It would stick to the clothes underneath, and I finally got rid of it because it was just too annoying. So anything with a nice slick texture, you want the texture, you know, on the outside.
Can I ask a question about the Duchess satin?
Yeah.
I'm really leery about using it. Do you have to pre-treat it?
No.
Should it be dry cleaned before? And does it is it easy to water spot it, you know, to make water stains if water gets on it?
Oh, well, there's a little trick for that. And I talked about it. If you have the Craftsy class that Threads and Craftsy did on fabrics, I show this because there are certain fabrics, silk fabrics like silk taffeta, silk Duchess satin, anything like that, that if you get a water spot on it, you know, and it seems counterintuitive because what you don't want is you don't want the ring. And I think that's what you're concerned about. You get your spritzer bottle and you spritz around. So what you're doing is you're putting in water around over that drop of water so that it kind of diffuses out, you know, onto the fabric. So, you know, you're going to be, and it's one of those things that you think, oh my God, I'm going to ruin it, but it works. So then what you do with your iron, you don't touch the iron down. You steam. And like all of a sudden you're going to see that all that water just go away and you won't leave a spot.
And when you normally iron it, would you do it without steam when you?
I like to press a Duchess satin without steam. I like it to press it with dry iron.
Right.
Yeah.
I've just been finding like solids, like nothing with a print on it.
Okay.
That
you know,
typical.
you could go with something like a jacquard. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Duchess satin.
Yeah, I would be more comfortable. There's something, I just think a Duchess satin is like taffeta. Is it?
Can be. Yeah, it can be. Well, then there's bridal satin, which is a little less stiff.
Yeah.
And then there's there's bridal satin, slipper satin, Duchess satin. Duchess satin, yeah, you could roof a barn with it. It does get to be a little bit stiff. But you know, like a slipper satin or bridal satin is a little more limber. It's, you know, a little more fluid. So, you know, that said, well, let me show you one example. We go to my fabulous jacket here. Now, this is not classically a lining fabric, but it's a jacquard.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And,
I would be more comfortable using that than a
Yeah.
Duchess.
so,
All right, good.
yeah, you know, and the beauty of that too is, you know, first off, it's interesting. Secondly, you know, if you get a little spot or something in the sewing, you're not going to notice it so much on that as you would a Duchess satin.
Right.
So
All right.
it's a little more forgiving.
Right.
Is that
I'm very
jacquard a silk?
This jacquard is probably rayon. You know, this,
Okay.
see, I'm not a silk snob. There are some people who just, and I was that when I was in college and my textiles professor used to roll her eyes. You know, I was onto this, oh, I couldn't have a man-made fiber touch my skin because I was a brat. But, you know, you know, anything like that, it's either rayon or acetate. And I would caution against polyester because that's a little bit too hot to wear. But the acetate and the rayon especially, is like an honorary it's an honorary natural fiber because it's a cellulose-based fiber like cotton is. So you can get some really nice rayons for lining that are going to be easy to work with and interesting and also comfortable to wear. Okay. So other questions?
Yes, Kenneth.
Yes.
If we chose a stripe or a plaid,
Mhm.
will you instruct us how to match it
Oh gosh. You know, for the inside or the outside?
outside? Or is
Outside.
that too much?
Well, you know, it's one of those things I would have to kind of let me see if I can pull together a video on that because well, like the short version, what I do when I'm matching, let's just say the plaids, obviously you want to make sure that the horizontal lines up. What I like to do if I'm matching a plaid or stripe or a pattern, I start at the center back. And so right across the shoulder blades is where I want that pattern to match. You know, because above and below, you know, with the shaping of the jacket, it's gonna get a little, but you know, if it matches across the shoulder blades and back, that's where I start. And so then what you're gonna do is you're gonna just kind of work around the body. So to the back, you work around to the front. And, you know, I match at the shoulder blades on the back, but then, you know, I match the stripes or whatever, you know, kind of working around at the hem, because that is the other place that your eye tracks. And it's easier. I know this sounds kind of like a pain in the neck, but if you want it to match nicely, it's what you have to do. Cut it single layer.
Well, it sounds like a whole different course.
It's, you know, it kind of is.
Okay.
So
And
stripes are a little easier than plaids, but yeah. So Nina, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, so thank you. So I think you saw my fabric, you know, it's that pistachio green with the brown stripe, pinstripe running through it. So the lapel, I've been staring at the lapel, trying to think about how do I do the peaked lapel in that way?
Well, there are two ways you could go. You could match the grain line of the lapel to the center front of the jacket. That's one way of doing it. I have also seen them match the grain line to the edge of the peak.
Okay.
Grain line goes this way. So on the inside of the facing, it's going to look a little cattywampus, but you know, the two different ways of going.
Okay.
So those are two ways to handle that.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So then would a man's weight fabric that you would tailor a suit out of, a wool flannel, would that be an appropriate fabric for this jacket that
That
we're
would
making?
be a perfect first jacket
Okay.
because men's wool flannel, kind of a medium weight, maybe has a little texture, maybe if it's a tweed. Very forgiving for a first go.
All right, thank you.
Because when
What
I'm
about wool?
teaching, oh, go ahead.
What
Go
about
ahead.
wool suiting? Because wool suiting is a little bit lighter. Because I'm thinking we're going to be done this jacket sometime in the spring, and then I
Yeah.
didn't know whether I should use a heavier fabric.
Well, the thing is, you're in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be like,
I'm going to be okay, but just kind of generally speaking.
well, generally, again, for a first go, I kind of like something a little heavier.
Uh-huh.
Just, and when I teach tailoring to my students at FIT, whether it be in the couture tailoring or whether it be like second semester, I tell them as a first go, a tweed is excellent because a
Okay.
tweed is so forgiving. There are all sorts of things that you won't see in the tweed. So, like, well, example, where is it? I know it's here, or it was here. Oh, here it is. This one here, this is a silk and cotton tweed. So it's not as heavy as the flannel, but the texture is, like I said, extremely forgiving. And it's one that I tend to wear in warmer weather. So, it's something that you can get away with. If I want to wear it in the winter, I have to wear a turtleneck under it. But something like that, like a cotton and silk tweed, would work really nicely for something if you're aiming to wear something in the spring, summer. Okay, so other questions?
Now, on that tweed that you just showed us, did you
Yeah.
underline that one?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No. And I just steam pressed it. Now some people have their wool dry cleaned. If you wish to do that, I would say great. I generally just take mine to the dry cleaner and I say steam press the hell out of it, like you're pressing a tablecloth. And that seems to work really well as far as getting any of the residual shrinkage out of it. The canvas, I see this and I don't quite understand why they do it. They dunk it in the water and then they hang it up on the clothesline. And see, I don't quite understand what that does because, heat and moisture are going to cause shrinkage. So if you're just dunking it in the water, it may get some of the sizing out of it, but I don't see how it accounts for the shrinkage you're going to get from steam and moisture. So I steam press all of my my canvas before I actually use it.
A steam dryer is really nice too if you have one.
Yeah, well,
It's perfect.
you haven't seen my tiny little place here. This building was built in like around the Civil War, so they
You have,
didn't have
you have an
elevators.
easy bake oven about this big.
Well, you see, I don't have I don't. You can kind of see it back there. It's a kitchen in name only. I don't really use it for cooking. I use it for storage. So yeah, no steam dryer, sadly. So Sally, you had your hand up.
Is there a benefit for this first time of trying to go with 100% wool versus a blend?
It would depend on what the blend was. Because like I said, this fabric here, this is silk and cotton, worked out really well. Silk is a protein fiber and cotton, of course, is a natural fiber. And it worked out really well. I didn't find it to be troublesome at all. I just like wool as a first go just because it's so malleable. But
Right.
if you find something that you like that has wool and another fiber blended into it, I think that would work just fine.
Yeah, I'm finding many of the tweeds have a polyester or something else as one of the other fibers.
Yeah. Well, as long as the majority is wool, then
Okay.
you're good. Because I have actually, it's actually because I just happen to have them all hanging here. This one, this is a different class, but this tweed this is a wool and polyester. And different class, the shawl lapel jacket. But I was really amazed at how how easily it tailored. So yeah, if it has a predominant wool in it, you're going to be just fine. Okay, so other questions? Crickets. I just have to show this again because This is how I entertain myself. Yeah, because I don't know if I have my Instagram account, and then because this is Lola, she was a showgirl. She's the subject of the book, which, by the way, I finally got the corrected, because it's a big long story, but I finally got them to send me back all the corrections for pass number 1. And so I'm calling in sick tomorrow, I've decided, because I need just like one day of uninterrupted and complete silence to just go over. You know, I'm gonna use my laptop with the copy that I marked up, and then I'm gonna have the one they sent me on the big computer, so I can, like, page by page comb through to see if they've got everything correct. So yeah, so today I was doing this because, see, there's the Lola the Showgirl 24. What I'm doing is I'm doing Lola's backstory, or Bella's backstory, because Bella and Lola's stories intersect in this new book. So I figured I wanted to get all of the Bella blackmail, the trial, they were convicted, she went to Fire Island, she got the book deal. That all has to come before we then start launching into the Lola story. So, I know some people are thinking I'm crazy, but that's what I've been doing in my spare time, waiting, drumming my fingers on the tabletop, waiting for this manuscript. So that's, there you have it. So other questions before we start tonight?
So Kenneth, I made my muslin this week, and I don't know what I did, but I had the peak lapel that ate Manhattan because it went out to about my shoulder.
Okay.
So I totally have to start again and do it over. But yeah, I'm not sure where I went wrong, but I'm going back and I'm going to do it again.
Okay, fair enough. And so, as you're working on your muslins and such, we do have the office hour. So I want to make sure
Yeah,
that knows that. So.
I want to come to you with the muslin that's like decent. I did have a question. So I've never made a blazer with the like the slit on the side.
Side vents, yeah.
The side vent. Do those like come together, or do they overlap? How will they be sewn?
Okay, so
could you show us what that looks like?
Okay, so yeah, there is the side vent. So here is the back panel. And yeah, so the extension on the side
comes in.
Yeah, and so then on the inside, I learned this from Bespoke Clothing. So on the inside, what we're going to be doing is creating, see that strap?
Uh-huh.
That's called a vent.
Oh, that holds it.
Yeah, so that holds the two underlaps together so that they don't kind of out. So yeah, it's you see this a lot in English tailoring.
Okay.
See, I as a rule for years and years and years would not wear any kind of a vented jacket, because when I was a kid, I remember this distinctly. I had on my little jacket one time when I was a kid. I was probably in first or second grade, and my mother said, "Your butt is so big, those vents never stay closed." And from then on, like, I wouldn't wear vents. And so I realized at a certain point, I had someone kind of sit me down and say, "Okay, your butt is not big anymore. There's not much of it there. You can wear it again." So, because
I thought maybe I needed wider in the hips, because I had them coming like this and they kept, folding open. So they've got to overlap. All right. Thank you.
And you may have to give a little extra in the side just so that everything hangs square in the back.
I think I do. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So other questions?
Well, I would just be worried. I do have a behind. And so I guess I'm going to see with my muslin about how those, the slits hang.
Yeah. And if you don't want to have the vent, you don't have to.
Yeah, I know, but it would be nice.
Because, someone asked me, like, can I have a center vent? Yeah, it works the same. It just, it's just one in the center. So, we can kind of adapt a little bit based on preferences and figures, because
and then you went up almost to the waist, or
About
So-
3 inches down from the waist. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but like, would you do that just for a male, like a female figure? Would you go up that high? Especially if you have a behind?
Yeah.
Because I think I decided only to go up to my widest, my widest hip.
Well, when we look at your muslin, we can look at it and see if it's going to give a
If
good
it-
line.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, because that's, see, since we are all individuals and we have individual figures, we can kind of, this is not carved in stone. This is how I constructed this jacket, but we can make adaptations based on your particular figure. I just, because we want it to
I would
look
just
like.
think that high slit is like on a man's, like a straight figure. Oh,
Yeah, but I've seen it on gals too.
have
And
you really?
well, because
Okay.
you see, what I like about it is that the idea is whenever possible, you want to create the illusion of a long leg line. I mean, that's the term. And so by having the waist, having things like that come higher to the waist, it gives a longer line from the waist down to the floor. But if you stop it at the fullest part of your hip, because see, you don't want the eye to stop at the fullest part of the hip. You want it to go past that.
Right.
So
Interesting.
So that's how I would look at it if I were fitting
I'm just afraid that it's going to be flapping in the wind if I go.
okay, but again, if you would prefer not to do that, that's entirely up to you.
Well, we'll have to see. I cut out my muslin today, so we'll see.
Okay. So other questions? Okay, so tonight we're gonna get going on the next lesson, which is called cutting and marking. And so as before, I'm going to collapse this down. And so please don't be shy about, saying stop if you have questions, because that is what we're here for. And so if there are no other questions, then let us begin. The whole process starts with the fabric. Now, this fabric here is a wool. It has this rather irregular texture on it that looks like moss. That's why I wanted to have it for this particular jacket. So pairing it with something was a little problematic. So I was able to pair it with this satin. It has a little jacquard weave. It has a little bit of metallic in, as you can see. I've used it before. It wears quite nicely for a lining. So the lining is not block fused. However, the body is. Now, block fusing, for those who've not heard about what it is where you fuse a fusible interfacing to the back of the entire garment before you cut it out. In New York, we have an option to do that where we take it to a place and they put it in a machine. If you were going to be block fusing on your own, I would cut large sections of fabric so that you can block it in sections to cut out the different pieces of your garment. It's a little more wasteful, but not absolutely necessary. I'm block fusing this for two reasons. One is the fabric itself. Let me zoom in a little more. The fabric itself is a little bit ravelly, as you can see on the cut edges. The other reason I'm block fusing and using white is really for clarity in the lessons here. The back looks quite a lot like the front, and so when I'm outlining different construction on in the different sections here, it can get confusing. So the block fusing, normally I would use black, but I use white for clarity. So here we have it. We have the fabrics, we have the linings, and next I'm going to show you the support materials. The understructure in a tailor garment is quite important. So these examples are going to be what you're going to see when we construct. Now, coming down over here, this is just, as you can see, it's just muslin. You can tell it's not terribly thick. You can kind of see the line of the muslin underneath. This is for the back stay. it's going to come in really handy also to make bias strips when we tape the body canvas. The body canvas, I'm going to be using this particular tailoring canvas. You can use pretty much any type you like. This is about a medium weight. I don't know exactly what the name is. They're differentiated by whether they have stripes on them, whether they have a stripe on the selvage, but this is what I'll be using for the body canvas. And then over here, this is a fairly sheer, you can kind of see my fingers through it. This is a fairly sheer tailoring canvas. I will use this to cut bias strips for interfacing the hems and the cuffs on the jacket. So these are the main understructures. So we have the actual fabric we're going to be making this from. We have the understructure fabrics here. Next, I'm going to look at notions. These are the different notions that we're going to be working with when we assemble this jacket. So I will begin over here with the shoulder pad. There are two different kinds. This is filled with the batting. And then this is the kind that's filled with layers of thin batting. If you need to adjust for a high shoulder, this is the pad that you'd like to get rather than this one. I find these on Amazon of all places. So you can actually take loose the stitching, take out or add, so you can customize the thickness of this pad. This particular pad here is from a place called Steinloff and Stoller in New York, and it is pad number A10. For staying armholes, neck curves, and the like, this comes in white as well. This is a fusible stay tape. You can see there is a 1/8 of an inch wide straight of grain stitched to a fusible backing. The beauty of this, which you'll see in the construction, is that it will go around armholes, around deep curves. It is a quick and easy way of staying any kind of edge that you need to stay so it doesn't stretch. This
Kenneth,
is what I'm going to be using.
Question, go ahead.
what would the English tailors use other than that fusible stay tape? They
would use a twill tape.
A twill tape and sew it down?
Yes.
All right.
And it's honestly, because see, this I'm doing, it's a variation of what I call old school. There are certain technological things where we have advanced. And this fusible stay tape, I came to know about it. I was in China in 2019. I was teaching and all the kids were using it. So I asked the professor there, how can I get some of this? This is pretty swell. So she said, oh, well, I can get it for you. And she said it was X, whatever, the Chinese money is. And, I didn't realize that 4 bolts of it would cost me like $20, or I would have bought a whole case. It is, time marches on, technology marches on. And, if you're really wedded to the idea of sitting there and sewing that tape down to the armhole, then I would say mazel tov. But there is plenty of work as it is. And so any way I can shave a little time off by using things like the fusible stay tape, because what you're going to do, you're going to fuse it so that that little 1/8 inch wide straight of grain sits on your stitching line, so that when you sew it in, you're going to sew it in. When you sew the armhole in, or the sleeve into the armhole, it's going to get caught into the seam. So different ways of doing the same thing. And like I said, you can get it at gorgeousfabrics.com. She saw mine, and I sent her a bolt because she was interested in it. And so she has imported it from China. So if you're interested, that's where you get it. I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
So
Kenneth,
yeah, go ahead.
Kenneth, I gotta go back to school. So thank you.
Okay.
I'll check out the link later on.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye now. So any other questions? Okay, so this is 1/4 inch wide satin ribbon. To tape the roll line. This is just a 1/4 inch wide garden variety ribbon. You could use 1/4 inch wide twill tape, but you know, there are times you use what you have in your studio. I have plenty of this, and so you're going to get to see this when we stay the roll line on the jacket. Another ribbon, we're going to be making double welt pockets, and this particular ribbon is 7/8 inch wide, 22 millimeter woven edge grosgrain. You can see the little, what look like the little selvages. That means it's a woven edge as opposed to a Petersham, which has little bumps on the edges. This is what we will use to make the welts for our pockets. Then we have mouse tail and rat tail. These are two, oh, here we are. These are two different satin cords. I'm going to be making a piping to join the lining to the facing. So you could use the thinner one if you want less bulk. You could use the thicker one if you want to show a little bit. I'm probably going to use the thinner one because I think it's much more attractive. So this is going to be what we will fill our piping with. So then moving right along, silk organza, always good to have some in your studio. I will be using the silk organza along with the tailoring canvas when I make the flaps for the lower pockets and the single welt for the upper pocket. And finally, this is just any old wool flannel you have. Mine happens to be kind of pretty, but I'm going to be using this when I make the sleeve heads after we install the shoulder pads. So these are the different notions. And finally, to hold it all together, thread. For all of the general sewing, just an all-purpose Gutermann. No mystery there. This is 100% polyester. I don't ascribe to the thing that people say about, oh, if it's a protein fiber, you have to sew with a protein fiber thread. This is going to do you just fine for all of your general sewing. Then this is what's called a Gutermann Mara 30. Gutermann, you can see there, Gutermann Mara 30. Now this is a buttonhole thread. It's also a top stitching thread. So I'm going to be using a color for basting because the fusible on the inside of the main fabric is white. This is good for pick stitching. This is good if you want to make hand-worked buttonholes. This is good for sewing your buttons on. It's just good to know about. So we have our fabrics, we have our notions, we have our threads. So we need to start cutting this thing out. So let's get busy. So I think this is a good time to stop and see if there are any questions. Crickets, crickets. No questions?
Is there a, if I go online looking for the mouse tail versus the rat tail,
Yes.
will they have those terms, or is there a millimeter or
Well,
that I should be?
the rat tail is 3 millimeters thick. The mouse tail is 2 millimeters thick.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it's a fairly common term, rat tail and mouse tail, but it is not universal. So if you're looking, the 3 millimeter is rat tail, the 2 millimeter is the mouse tail.
Thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, then we will continue.
Oh,
Can
I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
think my video's on.
Yeah,
When you use a iron-on fusible on wool,
yes.
why would you not use, if you were making this for yourself, why would you not use an underlining of like a fine cotton or fine wool?
See, normally, if I'm doing a wool jacket, normally I wouldn't even fuse.
I did the block fusing for a couple of reasons. One being that this fabric looked pretty much the same from both sides. So for video purposes, I needed a way to visually differentiate the back from the front. So that's one of the reasons I used the block fusing. The other reason is if you're working on something like a Litten tweed or anything that when you cut into it, it just completely comes to shreds, having a fusible is going to keep it intact. So, I mean, you could use an inner line if you wish, but for tailor garments, I tend not to use an inner lining because I use a fabric that has enough heft that it's going to stand up to the kinds of processes that you're going to see here. Does
So
that help?
if I was using a super weight 100,
Yeah,
would I fusible or would I underline it?
I would underline it because the the 100s, the 200s, those are like sewing satin. So if you
Yes.
did a fusible, you would run the risk of it bubbling over time. Because the
Yes.
other thing, I mean, you saw the texture of the fabric I'm working with. If it bubbles a little bit, no harm, no foul, no one's gonna be able to tell. But on something like that, you would want to do an inner lining as opposed to a fusible. And so what I
Okay.
would do is make a test sample, interline a little piece, sew the seam, press the seam, see how it wants to react before you actually commit to doing the whole thing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay then.
So,
Well,
so I have a question. I just, not to belabor this, but so block fusing is, a personal choice then based on your fabric?
yes, exactly. Yeah, because I know at FIT when we teach the beginning, well, the second semester, they're still beginners.
Mhm.
They insist that we tell the kids to block fuse it because it does make it easier to manage. And
Okay.
like I said, especially if you have a fabric that is going to ravel on you, it's a
Mhm.
real help. Lint tweeds, I know that sounds like a sacrilege that you're gonna block fuse a lint tweed, but honestly, whenever
Mhm.
I made things with lint tweed, I will block fuse it because otherwise the seam allowances just come unraveled like
Yeah.
crazy. So
Where in New York can you get block fusing done?
okay, well, there's a place called MK Cutting. They're
MK Cutting.
M is in Mary, K is in King, Cutting. They're on 36th, I think, and 8th. And so the thing you want to know is before you go there, you go to Mood, you get like I like to use a lightweight fusible tricot. And you get yardage of that, to the same yardage as what you're going to be fusing.
Yep.
You take the two to them, they have this big machine. They lay it out, they, put the fabric face down, they lay the fusible on it, they run it through the machine, it spits out the other side of the machine, you pick it up in a few hours, and you've got it block fused.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And it's not terribly expensive. So, honestly, for, if you have access to this wherever you live, it's a lot less trouble than trying to block fuse it on your pressing table with your iron.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So
I've got one more, I'm sorry, one
go
more,
ahead.
Ken.
Yeah.
What if I have a favorite piece of wool tweed, but it's very lightweight? Can I use a fusible to give it body?
Yes, if it's a tweed, again, you've got that forgiveness factor of the texture of the tweed that will hide any kind of bubbling that might happen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, then, well, we will continue.
Cut one of the backstay. And how I like to do that, you want to cut with the straight edge, rotary cutter, or scissors. These here, but on the lower edge, since this hangs loose inside the garment, I like to use my wavy rotary cutter to pink that seam allowance. Just tidies it up nicely and makes it pretty inside the garment. So the backstay is cut out and we'll set that aside. Lay the body canvas on the tailoring canvas and then check to make sure everything is on the straight grain. So I will pin this all the way around and bring it back. Now that everything is pinned, we want to cut everything out. Up here on this dart, just going to come across like so. We'll mark that dart in later. And then on this line here, again, with the pink rotary cutter, so here we have it. We have everything now cut out. So the next step is going to be marking. So let me just zoom in a little bit. We want to mark this dart here. We want to mark this dart here and the roll line. And up here, placement of the shoulder shields and that notch there, that notch there. So this is really tracing paper and carbon. So I will go off camera to mark that and bring back the results. Okay. Move carbon. Point out what we've marked out. As you can see, I have marked out this whole shape here for the shields. I have marked out the dart, the matching notch on the collar, the matching notch on the armhole, and this dart here. So now we're finished with the body canvas. We can set that aside. So as you can remember here, we traced out the shoulder shield pattern. And this is cut lengthwise grain running this way. So that's going to lay in there. And then I traced off from here one more layer. And that then is going to lay here. So the shoulder shield pieces will be sewn to the body canvas at a later stage. So we now have all of our canvas pieces cut. Let's set those aside and continue.
Kenneth?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I usually put these shields in, but I usually don't put that lapel pocket, the high pocket. When you put the pocket in, it has to it should not interfere with these shields, correct?
That's correct. Actually, if you put a chest pocket in, I set it into the wool itself. I don't set it through the canvas.
Oh, so you're going to make it in the jacket before you attach.
Before we put the canvas onto the jacket. That's a
All
little
right.
bit down the road, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
And what does that shield do actually?
Well, what it does is you have a rise at the collarbone, you have a rise at the shoulder joint, and then you have a little bit of a hollow between them. So this does is it kind of flattens that area out so it doesn't fall into a
Oh,
drape.
fascinating.
Now there is a thing called a drape suit. It's a thing. It's very big in the 30s where they didn't have the shields. And so the jacket fell into a little bit of a ripple right there because you didn't have the shields to flatten that out. But, and so some people like it, some people don't. I just like having that there because I think it gives me a better line, which is, always a good thing. Okay. So other questions? Okay, then moving right along.
And one last piece. We cut the undercollar on the bias from the canvas. Once we have the canvas cut, you want to use the tracing wheel and the carbon paper to mark the stitching line.
Now I'm going to stop here for just a moment because some people kind of ask, well, why don't you just cut it all on one, cut it center back bias fold? If you cut both of these so that the grain lines are the same, it has to do with the twist of the yarns on the canvas. If you just cut it in one piece, what you're going to have is one or the other of these corners are going to curl up when you make this. So you have a seam in the center back. You have both of these sitting on the same grain lines so that the twist of the yarns in the canvas is consistent so that both of your collar ends when you make this are going to lay flat and smooth. So in case anyone was wondering, why don't we just, fold it on the bias and cut one piece? That's why.
If I have a under collar I'm using a different pattern, it doesn't have the collar roll line for the stand. So how far up should that be?
This is, it's not carved in stone, but this is roughly inch and a quarter.
Okay.
Knowing you, that would be plenty good for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And so, when it's all said and done, I just have that there for reference.
Right.
But when you're, when you install the collar onto the garment, it will kind of take care of itself as to where that fold occurs.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Once we have the canvas cut, you want to use the tracing wheel and the carbon paper to mark the stitching lines and the roll line. So now the support structures are finished. Let's go on to the fabrics. Now, there's nothing really mysterious about laying out your lining. So as you can see, as long as you have the straighter grain matching, it's really straightforward. So I have this all pinned, ready to cut. I will take this off camera.
Well, before I take it off camera, you notice that these all are facing the same direction, but the undersleeve is facing opposite. You can kind of play a little bit fast and loose because this is a directional print, a pattern. So the front, side, and the back, and the upper sleeve, everything points in the same direction. But since the undersleeve is going to be inside the garment, you're going to need X-ray vision to see that it is not actually, the pattern isn't actually running in the same direction. So you can, if you're wanting to save a little bit of fabric, you can play a little fast and loose in your layout with the undersleeve on this.
Kenneth, I have a two-part question.
Yeah.
So you have this laid out, and the seam lines that you have drawn, those include the seam allowance, but you've cut the pattern pieces a little bit bigger. So will you mark them, or how will you know your 5/8 seam allowance and stitching lines and the like?
Okay, these pencil lines represent the cutting lines. So when I cut out a pattern, I generally just kind of rough cut it out so that I don't have to, try to cut on the stitch lines, so that when I'm actually cutting, I'm going to be cutting the paper and the fabric all at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. Did that answer the question?
Yes. So in other words, you will cut along those cutting lines eventually, and then from there you will go in 5/8 of an inch. Gotcha.
Okay. So other questions? Okay.
Question,
Yeah, go ahead.
what material are we using for the pocket bags? Are we using the lining or something else?
You could use the lining, or you could use, it's called pocketing fabric. It's a lightweight, either a twill or some other stiff, well, not too stiff, other kind of fabric for the pockets, because the lower pockets I generally sew closed, because what I found is if I have them open, if I use it, I'm going to get a little ripple at the bottom of the edge of the jacket. So whenever I install the lower pockets on my jackets, I sew them closed. So the pocket bags don't have to withstand a lot of wear. The upper pocket, the chest pocket, I would use a pocketing fabric, because I tend to cut my upper pocket, which we're going to see eventually. I cut that. I cut it so I can put a pair of sunglasses in, and it goes down below the edge of the welt. So I assume that I'm going to be using that some more. So I will use a fabric that's a little more stout, because it's going to get more use. But see, the thing about the pockets, you're never really going to see it. So you can use really any old thing you have hanging around your studio. Okay. Okay. So other questions? Okay. So back to work.
And cut. Now that you've cut the lining, we want to mark. So I'm using white carbon. I want to mark these 2 notches here. Just because. Now, the question people ask me is, how do I know when to mark? And the answer is yes, mark. So there you go, you can see that there. Now, on the pocket placement, which is here and here, that's just a simple clip into seam allowance so that you know where your hidden pocket is going to place. So now we have all the marks on the lining front. Now, let's look at the lining side back. Now, first off, notice again, I'm just going to reiterate, I use a 3-inch extension on my vent. I talk about this in the pattern making, but it's good to point that out here as well. So we want to mark this, and it doesn't hurt to mark this line here. So what that's going to look like is there. And I don't mark it completely. Just a little dotted line will be plenty good. You take this off. Camera. You can see the marks and the cross mark. And also under the arm here, this little matching notch here, just to be safe. So, there's that. So the side panel of the lining is finished. Now let's look at the back panel here. Starting at the neck, you don't have to really mark this. I generally just put a snip right at the center back. So you just put a little snip in the seam allowance. But this one here, just move it over, there we go. This one here, it doesn't hurt to have that. Then this line here. You very much want that. So, again, with your cross mark here, and then dotted lines here for reference. These two little marks on the lining side and the lining back, these two marks here are going to, this is where this seam will stop. So you need to know that mark. So make sure it's on there. Results of this marking. Yes, there we are. Back panel, the lining is marked. Now let's go on to the sleeve. Now on the sleeve, you want to have that intersection marked. This is where the stitching line is going to stop on the lining. So there.
I like that.
So the undersleeve is marked. Now the upper sleeve, you just need, right here, you just need to make a snip right there so you know where to stop that stitching line. And one more piece to cut, the inside pocket. Now I've cut two of these, of course, and I'm going to come here, mark little snips there and there, so that I have the matching notches to match up to the lining front. So as you can see here, we have all of our lining pieces cut and marked. So we move on to the body fabric. Before I cut out the outer body pieces, I'd like to show you this tool. It's called an eyelet punch. As you can see, it punches holes. And what I'm using it for is to actually punch holes in the pattern. So I punched on the facing, I've punched the notch and the corresponding notch on the body. I've also punched 3 holes where the dart is. And then reading down to here, I have a punch at the end of the roll line, punches for the buttonhole, punches for the chest pocket, matching notches here, and on the Donlin wedge, a series of punches. This here will be the pocket, and then these all match up to make the dart. So this is preparing the pattern before I cut out. Now I have some other pieces that I'd like to show you. This is the back panel. This is the side back panel. And on the side back panel, which you can see here, is that I punched the other end for the pocket. I punched a hole at the top of the vent and the matching notch at the underarm. So moving over to back, punch right here and a punch at the top of the vent. These are all really important matching notches, and don't stint on your marking.
Kenneth, on
Finally,
that piece
on
right
the
back,
Yeah, here,
sorry, on the piece right back there, did you cut it? Is that a 2-inch vent right on the left-hand piece and a 3-inch on the right hand?
Yes.
Oh,
You know, you could cut it 3 inches if you want, because see this, what this is going to do, this is going to fold under. So this fold here is the leading edge of the the vent, and on the underlap, giving it 3 inches as opposed to 2, it's going to sit a little further under the under this edge here. You could get away
okay.
here, but yeah, that's a good observation that this is wider on the side panel. This is 2 inches here.
On the back panel. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So other questions so far? You see where we're going with this. I like to punch everything because we're going to be doing a lot of marking with tailor's tacks. And I do
Yeah.
not like to sew through the paper. I don't. I want to avoid that at all costs because basically it chews up the paper and then the pattern isn't accurate next time you want to go for it. So that's kind of what we're doing in this step. Okay.
Important matching notches, and don't stint on your marking. Finally, on the sleeve, any matching notches that you have on the armhole, and then reading down, matching notches that this matching notch here corresponds with this matching notch, which is the surgeon's cuff on the sleeve. So now that I've prepared the pattern, I'm going to be laying it out onto the fabric. I'm not going to show you laying this out. I have all of these pieces cut. You've done this before. So we'll skip ahead to what we've produced, and then we will mark. Here we have the body front, the body side back, the body back. These are cut and ready for marking.
That's nice. I like
We
this one.
now have upper sleeve, under sleeve.
Is there a question? We good? Okay.
Lapel facing, upper collar, and way back there is the under collar.
I'm going to stop here and walk it back just a few frames. The upper collar is cut with the center back on the fold, and the straight of grain runs parallel to the center back. That's the difference between the upper collar and the under collar. The under collar has the center back seam. So I just thought I would draw that to your attention.
Upper sleeve, under sleeve, lapel facing, upper collar, and way back there is the under collar. So we have all of the pieces cut in the wool. The next step will be marking the wool. I'm going to take a little detour to a video I made for my students at FIT regarding thread tracing and tailor tacks, which we can apply here. This is a tool called an eyelet punch. It has a hole, as you can see, and you can punch holes in paper with it. So I'm going to poke a hole here and here, just through the paper, so that we can mark with tailor tacks. I also will punch holes here and here. This is a simple matter of putting some cardboard underneath and bearing down with just enough pressure to cut the little piece of paper out. So now we have little holes. We'll use these when we mark. You can see here, I've punched holes at the tops of the darts and at the end points. And we will use those to mark our stitching lines. I've also poked a hole here at the end of the zipper and down here at the top of the vent. So we are ready to start marking. For the marking, I'm going to use Gutermann, and this is what's called Mara 30. You can use any other basting thread, preferably white, and I will use a fairly stout needle. And there are two different techniques you're going to be learning: first tailor tacks and then thread tracing. Tailor tacks. What I'm going to do here is just barely catch the fabric. You want to go through both layers and then hold that aside. Stitch it again and one more time. I try to make the loops pretty much the same size. It's not going to kill you if they're not exactly the same, but you can see we have loops now, thread, so that when you unpin the fabric and separate it, catching your paper, and you pull, you flip. That's a classic tailor tack. So when you're marking points, this is the way you'll mark the points. Marking stitching lines is what's called thread tracing, and I will show you that next. We're going to be thread tracing the seam lines, the side seams on the skirt front and the skirt back, and the darts on the front. But before we actually do that, we want to fold the paper back along the stitching line. You don't want to catch the paper when you're thread tracing. So the folded edge, which is folded on the stitching line, that will be our guide for the next step. You thread your needle with a single strand of your basting thread, and it's a two-step process. You stitch once, and again in the same place, and you leave a loop. Then you stitch again, and you pull the second stitch flat. Second time you stitch in the same place. You leave a loop. So really, you stitch once, let the thread go flat. The second time, leaves a loop. And you just continue. Flat and a loop. This may seem like heavy going. I'm just going to finish this particular piece so you can see where I'm going. So again, you stitch, one goes flat, and one is a loop. One is flat, one is a loop. One is flat, one is a loop. Flat. So now is sewn in here. I'm going to show you what it will look like. It looks like this with the loop every other stitch on the top. on the bottom, it looks like this. So now when you separate everything out, you pull, and you cut down the center. So now, this is a little thing I like to tell you about how to know the front side from the back side if your fabric looks the same from both sides, so you don't get confused. This side and this side look like stitching. But since you have whiskers, see the little whiskers? How I remember this is the face has the whiskers. So the side that has the whiskers is the face side of your fabric. While you were watching that excellent demonstration, I was working off camera, marking all of the different pieces for this jacket. So let me show you the results. As you can see here, while you were watching that, I finished my homework. So let me outline what I've done here. On the back panel, I've marked the matching notch here with the tailor tack. I have a tailor tack at the top of the vent. And you can see here, thread tracing on the vent fold line and thread tracing along the hem. So this piece is marked. Then the side panel, I have thread or tailor tacked up here at the armhole. This is the end of the pocket. This is the top end of the vent extension. And as you can see here, thread traced the vent extension and thread traced the hem. So these two complete. We're going to move on to the undersleeve and the upper sleeve. Here, as you can see on the undersleeve, tailor tacks for matching notches and thread tracing along the hem, and same on the upper sleeve. Up here, tailor tack for the matching notch and thread tracing on the hem. I have also made a little snip right in the seam allowance here so that we can match these two up when we're constructing. These pieces are complete, ready for construction. Now I'm going to bring in lapel facing. There we are. Really, the only mark on the lapel facing is this notch here for the collar. This matches to the body canvas. It also matches to the body itself. So these are the smaller pieces. Now let me bring in the main body. A little more to show on the main body. So I'm going to start at the top of the main body. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Here we are. We have the matching notch at the lapel. I have made tailor's tacks here, here, and here for the dart. And reading down to here, this is the lower end of the roll line. So right along here, these are the matching notches for the chest pocket, which is going to be on the left side only. Then if you look over to the left, tailor's tack for matching the sleeve. And then we move down and you can see, let me zoom in a little bit here. This is a series of tailor tacks to mark the end of the pocket and the ends of this dart so that we know where the dart sits. We will go back over this in pencil later when we're constructing. Over here, I like to mark the buttonhole. And then finally, down at the end, I like tailor tack where the facing is going to meet the body right there. And then some thread tracing so I know where the hem folds on the body. So now, this pile of body pieces is finished. We only have one or two other little cutting things. These involve cutting bias strips. So it's easier to get all of your cutting done at once. So I'm going to be cutting bias strips for interfacing the hems and the cuffs out of Hymo canvas. And I'm going to be cutting bias strips out of the lining fabric to make piping for the lining.
I'm going to stop here and see if everyone's good, if there are any questions.
I had a question on the thread tracing.
Yeah.
Would you always do the thread tracing or would you mark in chalk sometimes? And why would you choose?
I like the thread tracing because it, chalk also works. What I want to do is I want to make sure the marks don't disappear before I actually need them. So what I like the thread tracing, and then what I'll do closer into when I'm constructing is I'll either go over it with chalk or I will go over it with pencil, depending. But to kind of get all the marks onto the fabric, I know it seems like kind of a big pain in the neck to go through all of this, but marking really sets you up for success later. And so I prefer to work a little slower here to get all the thread tracing and the tailor tacks and such, so that later on I know exactly where my marks are. It's kind of a long answer. Did that help?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so other questions? Let's see, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, could you turn off your microphone?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so back to work here. Not too much longer here.
It's a refresher for cutting bias. What you're going to do, let me zoom in here. You're going to line up the cross grain with your selvage. So when you line the cross grain up with the selvage, what you're going to create here, this particular fold is the true bias. Now, I'm going to zoom out a little more here because you want to see this. As you can see, this is quite a long strip based on my small cutting mat. So this is my little trick for cutting a lot of bias when you don't have a lot of room on your mat. So we're going to be folding perpendicular to this fold. So what that's going to look like. So you can see here now. This is straight grain, there's a cross grain. So we fold like so. If you want to, if you're working on a rather small cutting mat, you can fold it again. What I'm going to do here, because this is quite a long bias, is I am going to bring this all down like so. So you have a long strip. If this were a smaller mat, you would fold it one more time and cut that way. But since I have plenty of room on this mat, I'm now going to get my rotary cutter and my ruler. Now, the strips I'm going to cut are 1.5 inches wide. The first strip then, since we're cutting on a fold, will be 3/4 of an inch. And so line that up. Right up. There we are. So you have your first strip. Sorry. And then you continue on. So here, let me show you how this works if you don't want to have to be running all over your table. You can just fold this, line up all your cut edges. So 1.5 inches. And this is where you want a good sharp rotary cutter to get through all these layers. So you can that's going to give me plenty of bias. So there you are. That's how you can economize on cutting space on a cutting mat if you have a small cutting mat. So I'll put that aside. So I have my bias strips. Next, we're going to cut the bias strips of the Hymo canvas. So here I've already found the true bias. And for this, I'm just cutting 2 layers. I find it's a little easier here. These strips are 2 inches wide. The formula for determining how wide your bias strips for your cuffs and your hem are is the hem allowance, which is 1.5 inches plus 1/2 inch. You want the canvas to be 1/2 inch wider than your hem allowance. So if you cut, I'd say maybe 2 to 3 yards of bias on the canvas, that's going to give you plenty to work with. So there we have our bias strips. Now let's survey what we've just
I have a
created.
question about cutting the lining on the bias. Did you do that before or after you cut out the lining pieces?
I do it after.
Because that looks like a lot of fabric you had left over. I
A
usually
lot of fabric. Well, you see, see my magic number, and some people think, oh, that's terribly wasteful, but I find it works really well. 5 yards or 5 meters, whichever. And I
Okay.
found that, you know, whenever I have bought less than 5 yards, I wish that I had got that extra yard, and when I go back, it's gone. So the fabric, the lining fabric, it's a cool looking fabric. It was not terribly expensive. So I figured, okay, fine, 5 yards. So yes, I had plenty to make bias strips out of. But
And
yeah, you
if
want
I'm
to,
using something I have already, then not that much. Would I just do the cross thing where I sew it together and then
yeah,
make
absolutely. Yeah. And you don't have to make it all in one go. You can cut shorter strips and sew them together on the straighter grain, like, you know, like you normally would.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So other questions? Well, we're almost done. So
here we have everything that we've demonstrated. We have all of the body pieces. We have all of the understructure pieces, the body canvas, the collars, under collars, back stay. We have all of our lining pieces. We have our bias strips for interfacing hems and cuffs, and the bias strips for making the piping on the lining. I find it's much easier to get all of the cutting done at once so that you can get it all done, you can store it away and start working as you see fit. So that's our next step, is to begin construction.
okay, so there we are. So questions, comments?
I have something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk about, do you have experience with those big honker, the tailor scissors?
Yes.
The real heavy
Let me,
ones?
I have something to show you all. You mean these?
Yes, I do.
This, these shears, I mean, you know, I'm holding them up to my chest. You can see how big they are. These are probably what, 12, 15. They're big. And they have a little stand, you know, because these are meant to sit on a table so that you cut them. And these are by Wiss.
Okay.
These are probably like early 1900s. I went to a flea market when I was teaching with Susan down in Baltimore. They had a little kind of like sidewalk thing, and I saw them and I asked like, how much? And the guy said $20. I said, is that a firm offer? He said, you know, they're worth $20. Damn. And I took them to Westfall, and the way they handled them, it was like a sacred implement. You know, they were looking at them like, oh my God. And the woman said to me, you know that these are virtually irreplaceable. I said, yes, I do. Can you sharpen them for me? And she said, oh, we can work with these. And so, you know, if you really want to cut something out in a hurry, and see, it has this little ergonomic thumb thing. I mean, you could bean someone with these. You could knock them out. But, you know, I don't use them all the time, but when I want to get something cut out in a hurry, I get these out, and it makes quick work of cutting them
Do you
out.
think that it takes practice to use them because they're so heavy?
Yeah, it does. But see, part of it though, you know, it is ergonomic. You know, you've got the thread, the rest for your thumb, but this whole thing, it's meant, you're not supposed to pick them up. You're supposed to slide them across the table so you don't disturb the fabric either. When I was my first job in San Francisco 100 years ago, in display, it was this huge room. Half of it we had as the display, the other half was the tailor shop. They had the whole dry cleaning big boiler with the steam, you know, they had the whole thing. And I remember when they closed that tailor shop, you know, because you can't get everything. I remember a couple pairs of these going into the dumpster, and if I could go back in time, I'd grab them because, you know, they're special. So yeah. Okay, other questions?
So when should we expect to have our fabric ready to cut out? Because there's some I was thinking about getting, but it's overseas, it's an online purchase.
Yeah.
So how soon do I need to actually have the fabric?
But, you know, because you see, you have between now and the end of this class, which is like 5 more weeks, and then at least 4 more weeks after that. So you've got some time. If it's a fabric that you need, yeah, because see, really, you know, what I want to make sure is that everything fits, you know, and that's going to give you time to kind of get all your pattern pieces generated, because I don't want to generate pattern pieces until because I mean, you saw all the work last week about getting all the parts and pieces. You don't want to go through all those parts and pieces until the thing fits, because if you do all of that before, then you're going to have to work backwards and adjust all those pieces. It's much more efficient to get the muslin to fit and so forth. So, you know, I'm taking it in these steps, but you know, if you're not current week to week, no harm, no foul. Okay. So other questions?
When I make the muslin, do I need to put the collar on? Honestly, I really struggled. I have no idea how this collar gets added.
The collar is going to be hand set.
Okay.
Put on by hand. And so, you know, we'll get there. I want to say in the next group, I don't have the outline in front of me right now.
But for the muslin, it's the front piece with the facing, sides, back sleeves.
You don't even have to put the facing on. You just want the main body pieces. You could probably sew the under collar on. You just hand baste it on, just match the stitching lines. Because see, when I like to make a muslin, I like to use the dual tracing wheel and the carbon paper. I like marking the stitching lines on the muslin, and then you can kind of, you know, pin base,
right.
so, you know, hand sew them together. just if you have the undercollar on, if you have the body fitting first, then when we do the office hour, we can hang the sleeve. You want the body fitting well before you start hanging the sleeve. So don't try to put the sleeve on the body.
Oh, okay. So don't put the sleeve on yet.
And much easier without it. And so when we're doing
Gotcha.
fitting, make sure you have the shoulder pads so we can, get
Yep.
the shoulder angle right. But I know I'm stating the obvious, but just to be safe. Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay. So other questions? I think we're good. This is exciting. Yes. I'm waiting for cold weather because I so want to wear this jacket, but I'm waiting for cold weather. So and see, one of the things my students are like, well, professor, why don't you wear it in? I say to them, I love you, but not enough to waste a first wearing on you. So it's well, I'm just being honest. So I think probably what's going to happen, because we're in a place right now where we're starting to actually be a little more social. And I may have told you about this, but a couple of weeks ago the guy that sold us our wedding rings at Cartier, we've kind of kept in touch with him, and he and his husband have this nice little garden. And so, they had this little garden party Thursday, a couple of weeks ago. And so we're starting to do more things like that. One of the things and I want to schedule a field trip next week. Have you ever heard of the jeweler Verdura? Okay, Coco Chanel. You've probably seen photos of Coco Chanel where she has these big enamel cuffs with these big Maltese crosses on them. That's Verdura.
Mhm.
This is he works for Verdura. And he sent me, because we went over there and he said, well, I'm working at Verdura. And of course, my husband and I are like, wow, you're working, and he said, it's so refreshing to talk to people who actually know who this is. And I'm like, yes, he's, historic. And so he sent me a video the next day. They have Coco Chanel's jewelry. They have those cuffs that you saw in photos. He sent me a video and he said, when you come, we'll get them out of the vault and you can try them on. So I'm like,
how fun.
So yeah, so we're doing more of these kinds of things. And so, the first wearing is going to be something like that before I wear it to class. Then I'll wear.
Does Chanel own that company? Because I was reading some book, and when Karl Lagerfeld was, the designer, and that it's like they're going through the process for one of their fashion shows, and they like ended up buying a lot of the makers for the rest of the accoutrement and thing like that, but not them.
They own, I want to say they own the company that makes the flowers and the feathers. They bought out Lesage because they needed embroidery. But Verdura, it was one of those, he died, the brand kind of existed, but it was this guy, the guy who is running it now. He used to work at the auction houses, and what he found was that ladies of a certain income status, when they were getting rid of their jewelry, they were like, they can have everything but the Verdura. And so he started wondering, who is this Verdura? And he found out that he bought the rights, he bought the archives, he bought everything, and ultimately he was able to get his hands on a number of Coco Chanel's pieces. So I actually, one time I had a student, she was crazy. I'm just going to say it. She was at FIT. She was a gal of a certain age. She was going through a very contentious divorce. And one of the big kind of like fuck yous to her husband was she went to Verdura and she bought one of these the Maltese cross cuffs, 18 karat gold with aquamarines and diamonds. And you could anchor a boat with it. It was that heavy. And so I got to try it on, because I saw it and she was wearing it like costume jewelry. It was kind of beat up, but I was like, wow, you are wearing a real Verdura cuff. And as it turned out, I felt kind of bad for her because she was troubled. And towards the end of the semester, she asked if she could have an incomplete. And so I gave her an incomplete because I felt bad for her. It was the only time I was ever called on the carpet for giving someone an incomplete, because they said, why did you do this? I said, well, I don't want to add to her problems. So with an incomplete at FIT, the end of the semester, middle December, so you have all of the January, and then you have 6 weeks after the spring semester starts to get this done. So about 3 days before it was due, I got this email about, I can't. So I just said to her, you will come to my office tomorrow at 11 o'clock and we will discuss this. So she came and she was wearing the Verdura cuff. And there was this, like the good angel and the bad angel. And the bad angel was kind of whispering in my ear, tell her if she gives you the bracelet, you'll give her an A. And then the good angel was like, no, no. And so, good sense reigned because she didn't have it done. She had a sleeve and she had a sketch and she said, this is going to be really cute. And I said, well, how would I know? I don't see anything here. And so I gave her a D because I said, I'm giving you a D simply because if I give you an F, I'm going to be the one that looks like an idiot. But, I was sorely tempted for about 10 seconds to say, hand over that bracelet and I'll give you an A. But I didn't because my mother raised me right. So I know she would be looking down from heaven saying, oh, that was bad. So yeah.
That would come to bite you tenfold
It
anyway.
would come to bite me because she was troubled. That's the word. She was troubled. And I think it would have just caused all sorts of problems. And yeah, so I just admired it from afar. And so now I can go visit Chanel's cuffs. So all good.
Okay.
Okay. So other questions before we sign off for the evening. So if you have questions like during the week and whatever, what I would ask you as far as office hours, like let's look at next week because I had to call in. I'm calling in sick tomorrow so I can get this damn manuscript sorted out. I had to get out the big boy voice Thursday. And see, I don't normally do this. I try to be, let's all be reasonable and talk in reasonable tones. And it wasn't working. And so I finally just kind of hauled off and let it rip. And towards the end of the day, Thursday, because I can be a terrier. And part of the thing was, one of the things they were wanting to do in the story, they had edited out the 2 photos where the bad guy gets caught and gets sent to jail. It was like, then the whole story falls apart. And I just kept hammering and kept hammering. And finally, I think the gal, because I copied like the CEO with everything. And at one point she's like, oh no, I don't have to do this. And I'm like, no, lady, I haven't got what I want yet. And so finally, I think she emailed the other people involved and said, just give him what he wants to get him off my back. So yes. So, they had to, just the Judy Newcomb. I don't know how many people here know Judy Newcomb. Judy Newcomb quit. Now, Judy Newcomb doesn't quit. Judy Newcomb, she's in there, and we were going over this manuscript. This is Tuesday, and it was like an hour and a half for 5 pages. It was that bad. And she just said, I quit. And I kind of just stopped talking because it was like, you mean you quit for the evening? And then she said, no, don't misunderstand me. I'm done. I'm off the job. And I said, I will not hold it against you. I've worked with her for 20 years and I completely understand. I said, I will not hold it against you. I know what's on me now. And so that's when I had to start getting out the big boy voice. And so, yeah, people are snapping to now, which is better. So tomorrow, I'm going to download this recording tonight. You're going to get it probably either later tonight or early in the morning. I'm going to get up early, get to the gym and hit it because I've got my work cut out for me. So office hours next week. But if you have any questions, just questions, please email me. I'm happy to answer. Okay. Okay, then. Well, I think I'm going to turn off the recording. I think we are finished. I'm going to